Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. The FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report is sponsored by the Red Flag Group. The Red Flag Group is a business advisory, information services, technology firm that helps clients manage risk areas across 4 key risk areas, including sales and sales channels, which includes distributors, resellers, and partners, suppliers, customers, and human capital, which of course includes employees and contractors. You can check out more information on the Red Flag Group at their website, www.redflaggroup.com. Today I am in a series of the 10 Hallmarks of Effective Compliance Program. This is a series I've wanted to do for some time. So this podcast is going to be quite a bit different. It's going to be short, right, 10 minutes or so. And we're going to go into a specific hallmark of the best practices of compliance programs articulated by the Department of Justice and Securities and Exchange Commission in the 2012 FCPA Guidance. This series is based upon my seminal work on doing compliance, which is of course entitled Doing Compliance, Design, Create, and Implement an Effective Anti-Corruption Compliance Program. You can check out my book at Compliance Week. If you go to their site, www.complianceweek.com, and then click under Thought Leadership, then in-depth reports, and scroll down, you'll see my books available. So I hope you will check it out. I hope this podcast series might interest you in learning a little bit more about the actual doing of compliance. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox again. I'm continuing my 10-part podcast series on the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program. I am doing this in conjunction with a blog series of same. So if you want more information, I hope you will read my blog, which was posted today. And once again, you can always go to my book, Doing Compliance, Design, Create, and Implement an Effective Anti-Corruption Compliance Program, which is available through Compliance Week. Today we are on Hallmark 5, which is training and continuous advice or communications. So what does the Department of Justice and the SEC expect around training and communications going forward? Well, training obviously is to provide the basis to your employees of what the expectations are, and communication of your anti-corruption compliance program is something that must be done on a regular basis to ensure its effectiveness. The FCPA Guidance states that compliance programs cannot work unless they are effectively communicated throughout a company. Accordingly, the DOJ and SEC will evaluate whether a company has taken the steps to ensure that the relevant policies and procedures have been communicated throughout an organization, including periodic training and certification for all directors, officers, relevant employees, and where appropriate, agents and business partners. The sentencing guidelines are equally strong about this, and indeed around conducting effective compliance training programs. It states, an organization must take reasonable steps to communicate periodically and in a practical manner its standards and procedures and other aspects of compliance and ethics programs to individuals by conducting effective training and otherwise disseminating information appropriate to the individual's employees' respective roles and responsibilities. So training is recognized as an important part of an effective compliance program. It is not a check-the-box exercise because you're setting an expectation. Every time you engage in training, you engage in setting an expectation of your employee base, and I don't think this is something that should be downplayed at all. There's recently been some debate outside the compliance realm and outside the compliance community that training is basically useless, and I could not disagree with that more. You have to train so that employees know what is expected of them. Simply expecting them not to lie, cheat, and steal is not going to be good enough if the Department of Justice comes knocking. Well, what should you do in terms of documentation? Obviously, it's important to document who has attended the training. It's important to document what the training was, and it's important to document that the training was completed. But there's been a new prong added by the Department of Justice. Starting in the fall of 2014, We heard Leslie Caldwell and Wei Chin, the Compliance Counsel, talk about measuring the effectiveness of your compliance program. And this was enshrined in the DOJ pilot program under the components for remediation. So how are you going to demonstrate the effectiveness of your compliance program? Well, at one level, you can have some really basic questions. What does the FCPA stand for? What does it prevent? Does your company allow facilitation payments? How do you report compliance violations at your company? What types of improper conduct should you report? Even what's the name of the company's chief compliance officer? For more high-risk employees, you can have more focused evaluations. You can give some circumstances an employee might face when traveling or discussing business abroad. But you need to document this, and you need to try to document the effectiveness of your training. So we're going to have to watch that to see what additional communications we get from the Department of Justice. But ongoing communications is also a part of this hallmark, and this cannot be too strongly emphasized. I would point you to the first publicly announced declination, which of course was the 2012 Morgan Stanley declination. In that declination, they specifically pointed to one of the reasons the company was not prosecuted was that over 7 years, it sent out 35 compliance reminders to its workforce, including the employee who violated the FCPA. So this is a great demonstration of communication that was very cost effective because it was simply an email, but it was also documented. So that's going to be an important part of your communication going forward. Senior management, obviously, as we previously discussed in Hallmark number 1, must be committed to doing business, but they must communicate these commitments down throughout the organization. But don't forget that leadership is not only limited, leadership and compliance is not only limited to senior management. Tone at the top begets tone at the middle begets tone at the bottom. So for each rung, there's a need for compliance leadership. Communication can take many forms. We talked about the Morgan Stanley declination, but in today's world, you might want to consider the tools of social media. Do you use those tools of social media within your compliance function? Some companies, Dun & Bradstreet is one that obviously comes to mind, are very robust in utilizing the tools of social media. They have the equivalent of Twitter behind their firewall, so they can have a communications tool which engages in a two-way communication, both up and down. So the compliance function can communicate with various geographic regions across the world, and those people can communicate back to your compliance function around any key concerns that they may have. So never forget that it's really a two-way communication street, and that's why the continuous advice is really more than simply advice, it's communication as well. The key, however, is that it must be done effectively. So there are a myriad of compliance trainings professionals, online training companies, and other mechanisms you can use for your training. The same is true for communications. If you don't have budget, just pick up the FCPA Guidance. I can really think of no other way or no other better training material that's available for you free at the Department of Justice and SEC websites. And they have a series of hypotheticals, they have a series of examples, they have a series of companies that received declinations and what those companies did to obtain those declinations, and you can use those as your training material. Surely the Department of Justice is not going to criticize you for utilizing their hypotheticals in the guidance as being ineffective, but it's really what works for your company. And you need to think about what works for your company going forward. So training and communication, hallmark number 5, get out of the office and on the road and utilize the tools that are available to you. I would urge you to think about social media as a new and more effective way to communicate with millennials and others within your workforce. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report, where I focused on one hallmark in the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program. If you want more information, I hope you will read my blog post today. It correlates to this podcast, so I'm trying to do a written and audio series for everyone. If you would like to utilize this audio in any of your training materials, please contact me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com and we can make arrangements for that as well. Also, once again, the series is based upon my textbook or my book, Doing Compliance, Design, Create, and Implement an Effective Compliance Program. And I would urge you to go to Compliance Week and check out my book if you'd like any more information. I have much more detail in the book. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to this episode.